Hi, I'm Malcolm Stern, and in conjunction with my friends John and Sandra Wilson from Online Events, we're creating a series of podcasts called Slay Your Dragons with Compassion. My book of the same name was conceived and inspired by the suicide of my daughter Melissa and the journey that took me on and the internal resources that I found. All of my guests will have a story to tell around overcoming and ultimately thriving through adversity. Special thanks to the band Stairway, Jim McCarty and Louis Chinamo, for the use of theme music from their album Medicine Dance, and my engineer Owen Santiago. I hope you enjoy this series, and thanks for listening. So welcome to my podcast, Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, which I'm doing in conjunction with Online Events. And we're getting a succession of guests who are sharing their experiences of life, often how adversity has brought them to be who they are and what's dictated the circumstances of their experience. And today, as usual, I'm talking to an old friend. I'm often talking to old friends. We're talking to another old friend today, Carlos Glover. And Carlos has been working as a shaman for a long, long period of time. And perhaps you could clarify for us, first of all, Carlos, what does the word shaman actually mean?
Well, it's a controversial word, really, and I don't actually apply it to myself that much. I think of myself more as a carrier of earth medicine, or an earth medicine teacher. But I would say a shaman is really, it's when you're really connecting with this world and with the spirit world, and you're able to really access the spirit world and hear the voices of the spirits and have guidance at will. So you can go there into that state of consciousness, that trance, and really connect at will. So nowadays shaman is used very widely to a lot of applications, and perhaps it's become a bit too broad, really.
Yes, it's a bit like Tantra, isn't it? It's like it's sort of everything falls under that umbrella. But what
Mm.
I'm hearing is that you've been a student of wisdom for a really long time, that actually you have also been a teacher of wisdom for a long time.
Mhm.
Something that you wouldn't have come out of your mother's womb and gone, right, well, shamanic studies is where I'm at. Something led you in this particular direction. And
Yeah,
you can tell us a bit about your story and how you started off doing the work you're doing and what's driven you in that direction.
yeah. Well, of course, it could be a very long story, but I do remember as a child wondering about spirit, God, what is this whole mystery thing that we're involved in? What is the meaning of this? I can remember wondering about that, and conventional religion didn't satisfy me. In fact, I decided at the age of 16, okay, I'm an atheist. And then I guess certain experiences opened me up to spirit and questing into the mystery, really. So one thing led to another. Um, and yeah, I know a lot of your work has to do with, supporting people to find their truth and, really listening to their voice. So I think I went on a long journey with that. In terms of the difficulties and the dragons that I've needed to think about and slay with compassion, or am still slaying with compassion, let's face it. I would say probably not not so much. I don't really see it so much in childhood, but in the teenage time, and that time when we all want to belong, fit in, have a recognition from our peer group. That was a really difficult stage for me.
What was difficult about that particularly?
Uh,
You were different?
yes, well, we all are, aren't we? But we want to, be
We
recognised.
tend to, there's a great saying about childhood, about being a teenager, difference is dead. And it's like you avoid the differences as much as you can. You try to blend in, but sometimes we are so extremely different. I was very different as a child from my peer group, and I knew that I had different promptings than they had. And clearly, there's something very similar here for you as well. That
Mm.
those promptings wouldn't let you just blend in and sort of sacrifice the nature that was wanting to pour through you.
Yeah, that's right. There was a certain conformity that was needed at school, and that was partly from the teachers, but definitely from the peer group. It was an all-male institution, and at times it felt a bit like prison. Of course, I was being taught stuff that they thought I should learn, and I think at that age, there's a burgeoning of sexuality and the sort of emergence of that. And, I found myself fancying some of the other boys, being attracted to them. But, homophobia was even more of a thing then than it is now. I mean, I know it still influences people, but at least people can come out and be gay and, openly have respect from others. But, in that atmosphere, there was no sort of support, for variation like that. There was a certain heterosexuality was the norm, and we all needed to conform to that. And I felt like I needed to conform to that. So I joined in the kind of, I suppressed those feelings, and there was a certain internal oppression in myself. And I joined in the sort of the kind of almost witch hunting of, quote, queers. That word has been rescued now, but it was a very pejorative word in those days. So when I look back at that time, I hid a lot of that from those feelings, sexual feelings, from myself and from everybody else, and buried that. So I think deep down, I took in a sense of uh, being against myself, and of course that belief that says I'm not enough or I'm not worthy.
Mm. So
And
if we start to suppress different parts of ourselves, they're going to find a way of coming out, often in a quite bizarre fashion. I wonder if that happened to you at all.
um, well, I don't know whether having a nervous breakthrough is a bizarre, considered a bizarre. Certainly, my behaviour at the time was bizarre. I had a nervous breakthrough around the age of 28, and there were a lot of factors in that. Um, but I think deep down there was that sense of there must be something wrong with me. I mean, I was basically, heterosexual, attracted to women, but I felt somewhere in myself there was a part of me, and I wasn't really conscious of all that, but that must have been part of it, and that sort of feeling like I need to get into a relationship. And I'd had a relationship before. Oh, I don't know whether to plunge into the whole long story.
I think it's what's interesting is that you had there was confusion here, and I think what you've done, what happened is it became too much to cope with, and you had what you call what's known in the world as a nervous breakdown. But I agree with you, nervous breakthrough, because there's an opportunity when actually you do lose it completely, and almost like you have to reform at that stage. So I hear a reformation that was going on, and that how long did your nervous breakdown stroke through take?
Um, well, I suppose it took, I don't know, probably a few months of being in a mental hospital in France, which was not very supportive. I mean, the French mental health service at the time was very backward. And I moved over to Devon. It was really when I started living in Devon, and my parents were living here. And so I went to a hospital on Dartmoor. And of course, in my imagination, it was like, there was Dartmoor prison on the other side of the moor. I had my bag packed, ready to go at all times. but probably about 6 months. And it was after that that I started doing, a lot more deliberate personal investigation with other people's support, and going to a counselor, doing shamanic, quote unquote, shamanic work or medicine work, and other things really.
So what I'm hearing is that up until the age of 28, there were lots of environments which were suppressing, you were being suppressed by, or you felt you had to suppress yourself in those environments. There wasn't a lot of support in being who you are. And then you sort of like, you let it all go. And then something shifted and you started to go, okay, I'm going to become my own. I'm going to find a way of getting mentored by life. I'm going to find a way of making sense of this life. And that's what I'm hearing led you. That's the particular dragon so far that led you to the work you've been doing for many decades now.
Mm.
And and you got support. That was, I think this is one of the key things that I've written about in my book is the necessity to create what I call, what the Buddhists call Sangha, a communion of like-minded others. And as soon as we start to feel that, we can relax and let go and be who we are. So that was quite a journey for you. You went into counseling, you went into studying shamanic wisdom and medicine, this sort of stuff. And so things started to change for you.
Yes, I think it's, looking back at my own background, I think there was very little support in school for getting to know the inner self. There was no sort of, I don't think the teachers had had that experience. So no blame on them, but that was the culture at the time. I hope that schools are gradually evolving to have more of that sense of support for each unique individual and really connecting inside. And I think probably having a breakdown and going a bit crazy at the age of 28 was healthy, because it broke open that side of me that didn't want to admit that I had any kind of issues or problems. I didn't even really know there was the concept of getting to know yourself. I didn't really have that in my early 20s. I didn't know there was a self to get to know.
That's what it reminds me of. When I was in my early 20s, I was with a friend, and he said he was going to see a movie called, what I heard him say, Sid Arthur. But of course, it was Siddhartha. And I said, oh, what's it about? And he said, it's about a man finding himself. I said, God, that's really boring. But of course, it's one of the most important books I've ever read. And it was a beautiful film. And what I'm hearing is that befriending of oneself, of the essence of who we are, is part of the birthing of evolution in ourselves as well.
Well, that's right. And it's a beautiful film and a beautiful story of the two men meeting up after many explorations at the river, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, well, that's right. Life does initiate us as we go on, and I think it is helpful to find the right kind of help. Um,
And so how did you set about finding the help you needed? So you basically you fell to pieces, and then you had to put yourself back together again. How did you navigate that, and what led you to find the support you needed?
um, my parents had moved down to this area, and they knew that there were people in Totnes who did counselling. And I think they'd met one person, and they said, well, you could go and talk at the Natural Health Centre. And they said, well, you could go and talk to him. So I started talking to this guy, and I joined a little group of people in Totnes, and it was all about, opening ourselves up and sharing of our story. Now, at the time that that group was on, I was also on medication. There was anyway, without going into the actual details of the medication, but at some point, I had a friend who said, look, while you're on those drugs, they're making it really difficult for you. You need to stop. And he was the only person, all the people around me, the psychiatrist, my parents, all the people, nobody would say that. Nobody would take the risk. I'm not saying that people who are on medication should stop, but for me, the moment when I took my authority and said, I'm going to just try this little by little, I'll just see how far I go. Instead of taking them today, I'll leave it. Oh, okay, I'm okay. So today I'll just see how I get on. Oh, I'm not going to take it. So after several days, then I realized that I was actually becoming clear of that. And one of the people in the group, I remember him mirroring, he said, suddenly you came into focus. Suddenly I could see who you were. So I had to still be careful after that, not to go into my manic attitude, the manic phrase, because I could feel my thoughts, sometimes get my thoughts really getting excited and looking too much in the symbolic realm. So I had to, gather myself in and stay grounded. But I think ever since then, I've been much more able to deal with, with myself.
And I think there's something very profound about going through an experience where you actually are no longer in control of your
Yes.
faculty, your mental faculties. And it's almost like you have to find your way out of the labyrinth in order to access the part you've obviously accessed since then, because you've clearly done a lot of work and you are now traveling all over the place teaching and actually sort of like disseminating the wisdom that you've gathered for yourself.
Well, that's right. And I think having that kind of experience helps you to be able to relate to other people who are having similar experiences. People who've had addiction issues are better at dealing with, helping other people who've got addiction issues. So, when you have the experience yourself, it's much easier to help other people.
It's funny when I after Melissa took her own life, my daughter,
Yeah,
um, it's so many. Well, three people came to me having dealt with the suicide of their child. They didn't know about Melissa. It's just that that's what I put out. Obviously, something that attracted people who were dealing with the same issues, and
yeah.
because I'd been there, I was so much more capable of actually being able to be with them in their grief and in their distress.
Mm,
And so I'm hearing because you'd been there in this place where your mental faculties were all over the show and
mhm,
you'd lost control, that actually when you found it and you found your way through, you have much more capacity for giving to others.
mhm. That's right. That's right. Yeah, because I mean, you labeled me shaman earlier on, and I
That's it. Sorry.
hopefully
Shame on me.
clarified that. But I think it is something about understanding these realms of our consciousness that we all have and can all go into. It's almost like the dreaming, the night, when we dream at night, our night dreams can be wild. And what had happened to me in bringing this nervous breakthrough about was that I'd stopped sleeping because of the circumstances and
Very common. Very common. Yeah.
drinking a lot of coffee, and suddenly, the night dream erupts into the day. So you're actually living, in the outer world, the material world, you're actually living the night dreams. So it becomes very confusing. So I think there's something about that experiencing that gives you some kind of understanding of what is common to all of us. It's almost like there are the two sides of us, the everyday self, personality self, and then there's this, what I like to call the deep self, which is like our connection with the mystery. It's the life force that's in us that keeps our heart ticking.
And I just reminded of walking up Glastonbury Tor once and bumping into a vicar on the way, and we started chatting. And I was full of ideas about what I called the new age then. I was very sort of naive and sort of like full of the joys of that. And he said, the problem with you spiritual people, he said, is often that you're so heavenly minded, you're of no earthly use. I thought that was a very profound statement because what I'm hearing with you is that actually you've also had to ground your reality. You can't just flip off into these realms. You've also got to be able to handle life on an everyday realm. And that's the trick, because I've seen so many people who are so-called spiritual, who have no connection with reality anymore. They don't
Mm.
need to earn money, they don't need to do this, they don't need to do that, because God will provide. But actually, there's a Sufi saying, which is trust in Allah, trust in God, but
Yeah,
tether your camel. And
yeah,
and I think there's something about having to find our way to be both in the world and not of the world. And that's really what I'm hearing that you've managed to, well, you're on the road to achieving anyway. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I think that's absolutely right. And in our minds, we can divide things into what's spiritual and what isn't. But ultimately, even the physical stuff, the computer, everything has a level of, energy force within it. I like to think of it like that, that actually spirit is everywhere and it's even in the material things too. So yes, we are challenged to tether our camel,
yes.
do our tax returns and tie our shoelaces. Not that I always do, but tie
That's
my
why you
shoelaces.
that's why you trip over. Yes, that's it. Yeah. So actually, like life, since you found your way out of the labyrinth, as I see it, that you've actually found a real sense of purpose in life as well. That
Mm.
actually you have discovered what it is that this one wild and precious life is inviting you to be lived. So can you tell us a little bit about that purpose and what you're doing now and how you're doing that?
Yeah, well, that's so important, isn't it? Finding our purpose. And I do think some people find it quite early, but most of us, we have to go through a lot of different experiences to kind of get there. And I think it changes over time. I don't think it's always the same.
I think
Um,
that's true. So over the years, you have actually found a way of being that is in sync, is in harmony with who you are, and at
mm,
the same time is not sort of so convoluted or sort of off the planet that you can't relate to people.
mm.
And so
That's
you're traveling. And I know you travel to various different destinations around the world using your work, and you've also written a book, or is it two books you've written on
yeah.
Judaism?
Well, Earth Wisdom Teachings, it's coming out in October. I self-published it last year, but the publisher took it up and they're going to publish that. So that's really about practical use of the medicine wheel. So seeing the different aspects of ourselves. So I'm very glad to have completed that. It took a long time to write it. And really distilling a lot of the knowledge and wisdom that I've gathered over the time. Um, just coming back to the sense of purpose, I think it does unfold over time and you go deeper and deeper into it. And I mean, I do still get very interested in other things like politics and acting and things like that, which, is another way of expressing ourselves. But I think there's something about bringing our unique gift to life. And as you know, I mean, you've been a teacher for a long time, guiding people, honing your skills and hopefully improving over a long time to be able to do what you do now. So
Yeah, and there's a lovely sort of like explanation of this with James Hillman, the psychotherapist, who said that every one of us has inside us a diamond, DAEMON, which will drive us nuts until we are able to do what we were brought on this earth to do. And I
mhm,
feel I've been molded and shaped. All of the things I can look at and go, oh my God, that was a tragedy. That was difficult at the time. They've all had their part in helping develop me. And I'm hearing that this is very true also for you, that you've been shaped by your experiences, and that it's almost like you're on much more of a freeway now than you were before. There's not so much of a struggle in bringing who you are to one. And I think a book is certainly for my book, and I'm hearing for yours also, is like a birthing. It's like it's giving birth to something that really wants to come through you.
mhm.
And I think any book that can be written in 3 weeks is probably not a book that I'd want to read. But I know that most of I've written 3 books, and They've mostly taken 4 years to write.
Mm. Yeah. Well, writing, it's a huge process, and it is a way of absorbing the information and that you want to communicate and finding an interesting way to do it. And I've read, well, I've not read every word of your book, Slaying Your Dragons with Compassion. I love the stories that they make it come alive, because all of us can kind of have an experience of something by reading somebody's story. It's not a direct personal experience, but in our imagination, we're going into it and we can understand ourselves and other people better from that. So, yeah, it's a huge thing. And my wife was incredibly patient while I spent all this time sitting for hours in the garret, writing away. And at the end of the day, she'd say, "Well, how'd you get on?" I say, "Oh, I managed to write nearly 100 words today."
But it has to be in integrity, doesn't it? You can't just flesh out. I know when I wrote my book, I had a contract with the publishers, 70,000 words. But actually, I found as it evolved that it was going to be 60,000 words. And I thought, I'm either going to have to flesh it out, or I'm going to have to agree with the publishers, which they were very kind, they kindly did. It was going to be 60 instead of the contract of said 70. And actually, what I did was 60, because for me, there's no fat on the bones here. I've written what's true for me in as clean a way as I possibly can. So, and I'm hearing that your book took quite a bit of birthing, and you're right. Sometimes you can spend it, but if you put the time in, so even if you write 100 words, you're still keeping the energy flowing.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to reading your book as well. So I think there will be a lot in there that will educate me as well. And I don't know if you've told stories, because for me, stories are like
Yeah.
illustrations in there.
Yeah, it was critical to tell stories, really, because and I used like personal stories, my own stories or other people's stories. I used some sort of myths and fairy tales, and just to try and illustrate things and then extrapolate, bring out the wisdom and the teaching behind that.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a lovely way of teaching, because I've read sort of, or I've tried to read very academic books which don't have that capacity, and I find it difficult staying with them, even
Yeah,
no matter how brilliant they are. I need some illustrations. I need to sort of to be able to relate it to something simple so that I can
yeah,
actually grasp the nettle of the idea.
mm. Yeah, because you want people to have their own experience, their own learning from
Yes.
it. Because you can't really tell people exactly what they should learn, because we're
No.
all on our own unique path and need to learn for ourselves in
We
our
do.
own way.
And we also need support. So, and what I'm hearing is that your wife has been supportive to you. It's like,
Yes.
rather than what the hell have you been doing all day? You've written 100 words. It's like, how was your day? And you're able to be honest with her as well, that actually it's a struggle, but it's a struggle that you're drawn to undertake.
Mm. Yeah, my wife's really incredibly supportive, and she's a very good listener, one of the best listeners I know. And I'm learning that skill from her, because, we can also be very challenging to each other as well, but that's important too.
That's the nature of relationships, isn't it? So
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Yeah. So so now that you're out there, you're teaching, you're doing, what you're able to deliver. Where do you see yourself going? How do you see yourself develop? If you do, and not, we don't always know what the road looks like ahead of us, but do you have any sense of what the road looks like ahead of you?
yeah. Well, the thing is, the medicine teachings that I've been studying and I now carry, they've been traditionally they were. Well, there was a time when people were persecuted and killed, so they were kept in secret for a long time. I'm talking about North America now.
Sure. Yeah.
So up until about 1970, they were just not really given out. And then they started to be given out to interested people. And I still hold that this isn't about proselytizing or converting people to a different way, but it's making an offering. And then to those who are interested, take them, meet that energy and offer that. But I do feel there's something about, I want to offer the consciousness work on a wider scale. I think that our collective consciousness is moving quicker and quicker now, and it needs to, given the situation in our world. And I think, the communication, the tech that we have, social media and so on, are an opportunity to put it out. And of course, that needs to be done in integrity and not dumbing down too much, but making it available to people to help people along. And who knows, you never know the full consequences of your actions. But my dream is that that will support more and more people to start this awakening journey, which
And I think
actually, just coming back to what you said about purpose, of course, we have our unique purpose, but Eckhart Tolle, he says everybody's purpose is awakening.
that's nice. Yes.
You know,
And I know that you've because I've spoken there a couple of times. You started a series at the local church with a very sort of open vicar called Unity and Diversity,
yeah,
and that's a lovely series. It feels like you've created an environment where people can really go and be educated and can find community and can get inspired. Can you say a little bit about that series as well?
yeah. Well, as you say, the vicar's very open to exploration and to allowing people from different wisdom traditions to offer. And as you know, in this area of South Devon, there are many, many people who've gone quite a long journey into a different wisdom tradition. So we've basically called on people from this area. I think we've had one or two from outside, but apart from that, everybody's come from this area. And generally, for an hour on a Thursday evening in the church, people come and they present and give people an experience and then some discussion. And so it's nurturing people's spiritual lives. And I think we live in a time when all our spiritual, our wisdom traditions are needed now for us to step up and take this step of evolution that's needed. Yeah.
Reminds me again of Christopher Fry, Sleep of Prisoners. I don't know if you know that, but one of the lines in there is, "It takes so many thousand years to wake, but will you wake for pity's sake?" And there's a sense that actually we are being called on to wake up in order to take the step of evolution that's needed in order that we might create a world that we would want our children to share, we'd want to live in,
Yes, that's right.
a kinder, more conscious world. And I hear that you're doing your bit towards that as well, Carlos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think all of us, when we do a bit, it has an effect. And we can't, as I say, we can't always see the effect. But as each one of us wakes up, even a small shift inside, it has a big effect on the field of energy around us. So there are unseen effects when you walk into a shop and you're in a more expanded state of consciousness, that will touch the other people in the shop.
Yes. That do remind me of Ramdas, who was a big teacher of mine. I was very
Yeah.
fortunate to know him as well. And he talked once about being stopped for speeding by a policeman, and he was in such an altered state of consciousness. He saw the policeman get out of his car and he saw Krishna. This getting out of this with the blue light flashing. He saw Krishna coming towards him. He was sort of like in awe of this wonderful human being who was coming to give him a ticket for speeding.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I was talking in a conference one time in Vermont, and I said, look, what you put out, what you emanate with your consciousness, you'll get that back. I don't know exactly what I said, but the next day, this woman stopped me in the corridor. She said, I did what you said. And just that situation, the cops had pulled her over to the side of the road and they were about to give her a ticket. And she said, so I just tried to love them. I tried to emanate love to them. She said, because usually I just really hate them. And, but I did it. She said, they still gave me a ticket, but it was a lot lower fine than it would have been.
how
So,
lovely.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with other human beings. We can put them in their roles as police, or we can actually see other human beings that we're in relationship with at that moment.
Yeah, well, also, even politicians, I try to feel sympathetic. I'm quite a political, opinionated animal, but I do try and see the human being inside the politician. I've had dreams about Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson recently, in which they've come for me for comfort. Been giving them comfort. I totally don't agree with their politics, but it's a human being inside there
Yeah.
with a process to deal with, which they're probably not dealing with that well
Yeah.
from the outside. And who am I to judge? But
Tough. I wouldn't want to be doing that work either. So
no.
it is tough. So we're coming towards the end of our podcasts, and I
Yeah,
really appreciated your openness and your sharing openly about your vulnerability and the journey you've gone through. And the question I always ask at the end, and I deliberately don't tell people at the beginning that I'm going to ask this question because I like it to come spontaneously, is what's the particular dragon you've had to slay to become who you are? And that's like, what obstacle have you had to overcome? What resources have you had to find to become who you are?
thanks for the question. I might come back to you about that. No,
That's very
you,
good. Well,
you
back it
want
off.
you want an answer for the podcast now?
It's up to you. And maybe we
Well,
don't get an answer. It's
no,
fine.
no, no. I'll say something. I'll say something. I think I have been very self-preoccupied, and we probably all are a bit self-preoccupied. And so, in terms of allowing myself to receive challenge from other people or from life, I've always, my first reaction is no, defensive. And that dragon of defensiveness, which is really defending your ego, maybe it needs defending, maybe not, but it stops you from connecting with, I like to call it the deep self,
Yeah.
our bigger sense of infinite self. So, and when we can connect with the infinite self, that will teach us.
Yeah.
That part of us can teach us.
And I think you've named something very important there. So I'm glad you did answer the question, although it would have been fine if you hadn't. But I think you've named something very important that I think the immediate jump to defensiveness is often what stops the flow of dialogue or stops the possibility of the situation being transformed. And
Mm,
so it's a real practice to not go to defensiveness. And again, I work with people on that. I work with myself on that. And if I get sort of attacked in a group by someone who's angry with me, and I don't go to defensiveness, I often find that I can work it through, and what comes out of it can be quite beautiful as well. Whereas if I go to defensiveness, we lock horns, and
mm,
and then I'm just holding my corner.
yeah,
So I'm hearing that you're learning to go beyond the individual Carlos into the consciousness, the field of consciousness of
yeah.
humanity.
And to trust that, to learn to trust that, because when you connect with that, the divine part of us, then you can really start to trust. I'm actually reminded of Arnie Mindell when you speak about that, and he died very recently. And
Yes.
he was my wife's teacher and was my teacher for a while too. But he sometimes he'd get attacked in a group, and he'd go and join the attackers and say, "Yeah, Arnie Mindell's worse than that."
That's great. I'll have to try that one out. It's good. Yes, that's lovely. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Carlos. It's really, really
brilliant.
lovely to talk to you, and we'll communicate soon.